so you have no oppositions in your chart, and actually I don't either. And that was the one aspect we didn't look at. So I was thinking, well, I wanted to look at Taylor Swift's chart, and I wonder if maybe she has some oppositions. Now, the oppositions are the straight red lines. Do you think maybe Taylor Swift has a couple of oppositions?
What does opposition mean?
An opposition, well, think about the word. It means in opposition, standing opposite to each other. So oppositions occur when there are planets at exactly the opposite ends of the zodiac to one another.
Okay.
And actually, her chart is just absolutely perfect to explain the nature of oppositions, because her oppositions are all falling really pretty much between the first house and the seventh house.
Mm-hmm.
And an opposition by nature is an aspect that is about the first house versus the seventh house, about self versus other.
Mm-hmm.
And I call the opposition the arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at these oppositions, they're all between planets in Capricorn and planets in Cancer,
Mm-hmm.
which are always in the same mode. So Capricorn is cardinal earth and Cancer is cardinal water. So they're both trying to get somewhere, but they're getting somewhere and going in opposite directions. So I don't know if you remember that Dr. Seuss book. They did a film about it. I don't even remember the name of the story, but it was about these two guys who started walking. And I think one of them started walking in New York and the other one started walking in Los Angeles. And they're so determined to get where they're going. They walk, and they walk into one another, and neither one of them will budge because they're so determined. The one in New York's going to Los Angeles, the one in Los Angeles is going to New York, and they're not going to get it out of each other's way. Mm-hmm. That's an opposition. These planets are standing in confrontation with one another, and they are in the same mode. So they're doing things in the same way. The other thing that's interesting is they're always in complementary elements. So in this case, these oppositions are between planets in Cancer and planets in Capricorn, and Cancer is a water sign, Capricorn is an earth sign. Mm-hmm. So water and earth are both female elements, and they are beneficial to one another. So if you look at nature, water nourishes earth. If you pour water into earth, then plants can grow. So water and earth are really complementary. They're in a very constructive relationship to one another. So the only other kind of opposition you could find is an opposition between fire and air. And once again, air feeds fire. So again, and those are masculine elements. And so an opposition between, say, Aries and Libra would be another cardinal opposition. They're both trying to go to the same place, and they're actually complementary, but they don't realize it at first. And this is why I call the opposition the arranged marriage, because they're in conflict initially, but they have to learn how to work together. Mm-hmm. Now, Taylor Swift's writing is all about relationships. I mean, a lot of her inspiration for the songs she writes are all about relationships and relationship struggles that she's had. She takes her material from real life, and this is, look at it in her chart, how immediate these tremendous oppositions between the first house and the seventh house are between me and my relationships. And she's managed to make a marriage out of that. It's a creative marriage for her. It's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So people have to find a way for it to work for them and
Yes.
overcome that opposition. Is that kind of how that works for people?
Yes. In other words, these planets are like those two who are trying to walk in opposite directions, and they won't budge for each other. But they have to realize that they can actually work together, because if they sit down and talk, they could actually give each other a lot of information about what the trip's like in the rest of their journey. They could help each other with their travel. That Dr. Seuss metaphor. So in this case, Taylor Swift's challenges between herself and her partners, which is a common kind of challenge for Sagittarius. Mm-hmm. She has Sun in Sagittarius. She's put that together and used it as creative fuel, which corresponds with what the Hubers talk about the red line aspects, which are the oppositions or the squares. They generate energy. There's something that can be used as a creative force that you can make things happen with.
So she has a lot. Does that mean it's extra hard for her, or?
It means, yeah, it certainly could be in certain ways. It also means that there's an enormous amount of energy focused in that direction. And the other thing about seventh house is it's, yes, it's partnership and intimate relationship, but it's also the public.
Mm.
So she's making this struggle public in a creative way.
Mm.
And I think I talked to you before probably about Neptune rising and how the Neptune is the collective dreams and ideals and imaginings of a generation.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever somebody has Neptune rising or Neptune in the first house, that's just a different way of saying the same thing. So Neptune in the first house is Neptune rising. The rising sign or the first house is the self. It's the image the person has. It's the personality they put out into the world. So whenever somebody has Neptune rising, they're going to be, even physically, a sort of spontaneous expression of the dreams and ideals of a generation. So they easily become very iconic.
Mm.
So that's kind of interesting as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Now, some of these oppositional planets are in the 6th house by specific degree, but because the effect of the houses actually starts before they physically begin, really all of these planets affect her 1st and 7th houses.
Mm-hmm.
So, this one's not involved in an opposition, the Venus, but there's 7 planets here involved in this whole dance. It's amazing. It's a huge amount of the chart.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I know we can come back and kind of go, we can do one of two things. We could either start to play with her chart more deeply, the way that we were playing with your chart when we went through what each planet means in each house. Or we could go back to your chart, because I'm going to show you something else, which is called the derivations.
Say that one more time. What is it called?
It's called the derivations.
Derivations. Okay.
Yeah. And I think we talked about that a little bit because we talked about what your ruling planet is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I suppose we could stay with Taylor with this one, because the ruling planet is always the planet that rules the rising sign, and that's your true ruling planet. So again, if Taylor was going to look at a popular astrology book, because she's a Sagittarius and because you're a Sagittarius, that popular astrology book would tell you both your ruling planet is Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
But the true astrological message, or the actual meaning of a ruling planet, is not the ruling planet of your sun sign, but the ruling planet of your rising sign. So her rising sign being Capricorn, what would be her ruling planet? What planet rules Capricorn? If you have your poem, you find it pretty fast.
Saturn.
That's right.
Yeah, I really like that poem that you did.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's Saturn. So we find her ruling planet right here, Saturn, in Capricorn in the 1st house. So the ruling planet is the point of view that we look at life from. And that's where we're situated in life. That's how we're viewing everything. So what would be the point of view she might be looking at life from, with Saturn sitting in her 1st house?
So the 1st house. I don't know. It's like your sense of self, right?
Yep. That's right.
But with Saturn in it. Like,
What's Saturn? What's a keyword for Saturn?
for Saturn. I'm gonna look at my notes. like the fears you were born with,
Yep.
sense of responsibility. I'm afraid that.
Mm-hmm.
So don't mind my sickness today, my slow brain sickness.
That's okay.
So you have to connect the two, right?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously the fears that she's born with have a lot to do with her identity and her sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And you can translate that more into self-actualization, especially when you consider that Saturn's in Capricorn.
Yeah.
Because what are some of the keywords about Capricorn?
Capricorn. Goal-oriented, structured, successfully, responsibly, with integrity, seeing the essence of the form. So just really how things are structured, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's also a cardinal earth sign.
Mm-hmm.
So it's goal-oriented in a material way. And Saturn in Capricorn has a tremendous amount to do with our accomplishment in the world and fear of failure in terms of accomplishing things in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
people of Saturn and Capricorn tend to fall into two categories. One who will crumble and get crippled by this fear of failure, and others who will say, I'm going to succeed no matter what. They'll fight that fear of failure. And it's quite fascinating because she's really turned her Saturn and Capricorn in a positive direction, although it may drive her a little too harshly, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the entire point of view is, okay, I come in with a fear of failure. I come in with a need to be responsible, because that's the Capricorn rising, and to not fail. and she's automatically aligned with and subconsciously expressing the dreams and ideals of her generation, because her Saturn is sitting right on top of her Neptune.
Yeah.
It's like to just surrender herself to it and just let it drive her, let it take her. But I know that, from what I looked at about her life, she really has been very methodical about working to try and keep on perfecting her approach to everything she tries to create. And that would make so much sense because of the Capricorn rising and the Saturn in Capricorn.
Yeah.
And the Neptune sitting right on Capricorn. I mean, without Neptune, this could be a person who would try to succeed in any avenue, really. But Neptune, we're talking about feelings and dreams, and the emotional forces that move a generation in music is a profound emotional force that moves a generation. But a lot of people with Neptune rising also get involved in acting, because they have this ability to express a profound image that impacts the public.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that's so fascinating about astrology is that once you start really diving into somebody's chart, you really feel for them in a way that you never could any other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool just by looking at a chart that you can find, really interpret it the way you do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, once we this is why it's so important to get a real feeling for the basics of astrology. Really feel what Saturn feels like, who Saturn is, who Venus is. Really get the living essence of each planet, understand the living essence of each sign and each house, and then you start to sort of immediately hone in on what this feels like for that person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we're gonna go more deeply into her chart now. I think we'll come back to her at another point in time.
Okay.
But I think I'm going to make this a separate recording right now in case we're going to string her together or just have different sections about Taylor Swift.
Yeah.